Hello, Steve White, TrekBoy89 for Steve Arts 89. Well, Star Trek Defiant, the comic book series continues. This is not necessarily a good thing. And why is it not a good thing? Well, it's set in its own universe and it's separate from the JJ Prime universe, which is separate from the original canon Star Trek universe. And it's just so far removed from anything that resembles Star Trek. It's just such a Section 31 size slap in the face to Star Trek fans. Basically, they just took all our favourite characters, made dark alternative versions of them, and stuck them all on the Defiant, which is basically, you know, like the Millennium Falcon. So it's basically Star Wars Rebels, but Star Trek. Where it's, because that was the Star Wars format. We had a bunch of people, ragtag bunch of people, that get together to fight this big sort of emperor. And you know, the Empire, the whole establishment is the enemy, and they're just rebels against it all. And that's what they've turned Star Trek into. They've turned Star Trek into Star Wars. I mean, fans, for some bizarre reason, did it with a literal series called Star Trek Rebels, which fortunately was killed by the fan guidelines, and they still made, like, I think, a second episode, but they had to change all the uniforms, and they couldn't call it Star Trek, and you know, they had to call it the Confederation, stuff like that. It basically became a bad parody. Sadly, most of the actors from the original Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, all those shows were involved at that point, and it's a bit sad because they could have used their talents to bring money and attention to actual Star Trek fan films about actual Star Trek. But it's just the same sort of mentality that Star Trek doesn't work. Star Trek is bad. So we need to make it into Star Wars to make it work. And in order to do that, we have to make everyone dark, and we need to have an alternative universe where, you know, the Federation is the enemy, and, you know, it's basically a bunch of vigilantes and rebels just going out and doing things which are immoral and questions our, you know, integrity and morals and everything. And I'm just like, that's not what Star Trek is. And it's just so depressing because I've been a Star Trek fan my whole life, and up until the last 10 years or so, it's been a pretty good ride. You've basically had the TV shows, the movies, the books, the comics, all working together to maintain the same universe that you could believe in and live in a fantasy world, basically. And then along came the split with UPN and Paramount and CBS and Viacom and that whole mess. And then, you know, Paramount had to, well, they didn't have to, but for some reason they got conned into paying Bad Robot into making Star Trek films for them, although as far as I'm concerned, in my humble opinion, allegedly, supposedly they pocketed most of the budget and didn't actually spend it on the films. That's why they don't look like, you know, $200 million films. And yeah, they created their own little universe, and they created a timeline in that universe, and then they created shows around those universes or in pockets of those universes because copyright wouldn't allow them to share the same space as CBS's Star Trek, which they didn't want any merchandise or any product to compete with their product. They were making billions off just from doing nothing but owning the IP. And yeah, it really started with Hal Bennett. Was it Hal Bennett, or was it he basically sat down, looked at the whole of Star Trek and said, okay, out of all the Star Trek is a bad guy fighting Captain Kirk, Superman fighting Captain Kirk, basically. He distilled Star Trek down to just that one little goody versus baddie in space, you know, cat and mouse in space, and that's what Star Trek 2 became, and that became the normies idea of what Star Trek is. And now every movie, every series since has been just Star Wars, like a Darth Vader-like villain, and instead of a rebel crew, just Starfleet and humanity and, you know, Earth against them. And even that didn't really last, and we have sort of these series like Defiant, where it's like a group of rebels who are doing the work, like the Rebels, you know, fan film. It's just so depressing because I miss Star Trek. I really want Star Trek back, and I just realized they just destroyed, well, like 2 years ago, they destroyed the last vestiges of the original canon universe, which were existing through the novels. They destroyed that universe, and now it's only the JJ verse, Disco verse, Prime Universe now that anything can be made in, basically, which is why everything now in Star Trek sucks, because there is no original canon Star Trek anymore. It's not in the novels, it's not in the comics, it's not in the TV shows, it's not in the movies. They've finally killed it. And it's depressing, because although I can live in those old novels, there's millions I haven't read. The idea that I'm never going to see those characters again, I'm never going to see Star Trek again, unless someone comes in and throws that out and brings back the old Star Trek and says, no, we're going with what was working for 4 decades, not what's been struggling for 1. I don't like my chances of that. I'm trying to be optimistic, but it's just kind of all over, and it's depressing, and I needed to talk about it. I needed a video and some YouTube therapy about it, but I'm going to go. Feel free to share, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think of this situation.